This is the You Belong podcast, a podcast for all photographers where we throw out competition and comparison and instead embrace community and growth. We have the ability to learn from each other, and this podcast does just that. I'm Alison Hatch. Join us each episode because you belong. Hey, Rachel, thank you so much for that dumb little countdown.
I like it.
So I'm trying to get into the groove, into the vibe of my countdown before my podcast.
It's so good. They all need to see it, Allison.
Okay, maybe I'll do it. It'll probably get turned into a meme or something, probably if I'm lucky. Anyway, thanks, Rachel, for being on today. I'm so excited to have you. If you guys don't know Rachel Larsen-Weaver, she's a friend of mine, and she's amazing and creative and wonderful and so much fun to be around. So I'm so glad you get to be on the podcast today. And we're going to talk all things words, which isn't very photography-y of us, but we're going to talk words today.
We get to lean into our artist, creative selves that like are even more expansive maybe than our photographer selves.
Yes, expansion. It's all about expansion. I like it. Yeah. So let's start with, you can introduce yourself if you want and how you got into writing.
Okay. So as Allison said, I'm Rachel Larsen-Weaver. I am a film photographer. That's, how Allison and I came to know each other. I am also a mom to 5 kids. I, who happen to also mostly be homeschooled, though they range from like not yet in school and about to graduate in college. So, there's a lot of various school happening or not happening. And I also do educating and mentoring for photographers, but 1 month a year, I teach a writing workshop, which is part of what we're talking about today. And
yes.
Then I guess the other part of the question was, how did I get into writing? Sorry.
Yeah. How did you even get into writing? Yeah. If you're an analog film photographer, how is writing part of your process and how did you even get into it?
Well, it was my process before photography ever was. It was actually writing that kind of brought photography to me. So my creative background was when I was young, I would not have actually said that I was particularly creative, but I loved to write. I always had a diary. I was always journaling. I was always dreaming of stories that I wanted to write, that felt like a path for me. I also love the beach and I love swimming. And even as a kid, I was like, I bet a writer could just like live on the beach. They could live anywhere. So that was a big part of the dream. And so my undergraduate degree was in English. And after my undergraduate, I started my MFA in creative writing. I had a baby in the middle of that first year, and then I was like nursing her the second semester. And so I did not finish that MFA in creative writing. But that was always kind of the way I was drawn. But after I had my 3rd child, I was missing having a consistent writing practice, and I wanted to start a blog. And I felt like, to start a blog, you have to have a camera. There has to be some pictures. And so it was actually, I started with the pictures to pair with the words, but now I tend to sort of think about the pairing almost in the other direction, that now I often start with pictures and go to words, but I like the interplay of the two mediums, which I think lots of us do. It's the popularity of magazines were always the interplay of those two things. Blogs, social media, lots of places we like what conversation a photograph and a caption can have.
Absolutely. And as photographers, we have no choice, if you have a business, to have to write. You have no choice. So why not embrace it as like a part of your creative practice and your expanse with your work that you do, instead of fighting against it, which is a lot of the reason why I came to you, because I was like, I don't really want to do this. I don't know what to say. Like, Rachel,
Yeah.
help me out. This is hard. It can be really challenging when we're so used to being behind the camera and being faceless to having a voice in that way.
And I think that one of the things that's become sort of important, I think, for the artist photographer entrepreneurs in particular, that if you're trying to run an artful photography business, but then you are always thinking of your captions or your newsletter or what you're writing on your website as copy rather than another art form to embrace, you might feel yourself more resistant. Because I think most of us, we see the images we create, I don't think we're thinking of them as content, right? We might be using them sort of in that way, but we're creating art that we're sharing. And if you start to think of your writing as another way of creating art that you can share, but in a different medium, that will help get your work also in front of more people's eyes. I mean, just from a logistical, kind of marketable, analytical point of view, when you have longer captions, for instance, on an Instagram post, people stay there longer to read them. And that tells the algorithm this was a more interesting piece of content that it is going to put in front of more people. But if people have to trust that what you're putting in those captions is something of value and that they're interested in, and so that's a practice you can build up.
Yeah. So let's back way the heck up.
Yeah.
We kind of like jump from
Yeah.
how you started doing words
Yeah.
into, all right, let's do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So let's back way up. So 5 kids, MFA, like homeschool, your life is chaotic and you're adding in writing a newsletter and captions and mentorships and all these things and doing it from a place of creativity instead of copy. I have to
Yeah.
do this. So how are you juggling all of that? How are you adding in writing into your daily life as a creative practice versus have to do?
Well, one thing that I think is interesting to point out, you say all of those things, and all of those things are true, but in some ways, I might argue that it's the writing that helps make all of those things be
Ooh,
possible
I
rather
like
than
it.
it being another thing that adds on. So I kind of see that I have two separate writing practices, and they serve really different purposes. The first is a morning page practice, which kind of comes from Julie Cameron's ideas, but I loosely follow the artist way concept on morning pages. But those pages that I try to write by hand in the morning, usually before the rest of my house wakes up while I'm drinking coffee, that is me processing all of the swirling thoughts, all of the like ideas I have, the need to do's, the anxieties, the hopes, the dreams. Those pages help me to work through all of that and to feel like I've kind of, by putting them on the page, I can let them go and then I can ground myself in the rest of my day. The thing that they also serve to do is that as I'm writing them, to the surface comes ideas that keep showing up and that are revealing themselves to me. And when those ideas keep bubbling up, that's probably something I want to write for a newsletter, which then becomes a shareable, more public facing piece of writing, which that morning pages feel less like a creative act and more like a meditative, prayerful, therapeutic act.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the writing of the newsletter kind of builds on that. And that does feel like the act of creation.
Yeah, I think as artists, we all have to have some sort of creative practices outside of our quote unquote medium, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's heard of the artist way. And if you really do it, it's actually quite expansive, like
Yeah.
spending time in nature and all this stuff. And I think it's absolutely okay. Like you're doing is just picking a part of it that works for you. We all need to just try to find
Yeah.
that creative practice that works for us. And it's the same for me. I journal every day as well. And when I really think about what it does for me is we have all this information coming at us all the time, and it just kind of helps empty it out. It's just like,
Yes.
just
It feels
empty
like
it.
relief, like
Yeah.
where, I mean, not to use like a really, it's like popping a pimple or something gross. Do you know what I mean? Where you're like, cool,
Satisfying.
okay,
Yes.
yeah, like that's done.
That's
So
good. Yes.
now I can go on to the other stuff, and it's not like festering or, but
Yeah.
it really has, that's, I think, a huge part of, like I said, it's almost separate from my creative practice. That's like what allows me the space to be creative. It's the work before the work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but you also mentioned, I do think having like more than one creative medium that we engage with, even if the only thing you care about truly in your heart of hearts is photography, I think when we are exploring other mediums, it helps make our photography richer, and it helps us come to it with a new lens. And so playing in something and doing a little bit of cross training. I mean, I've never never been an athlete, but I think they do that, right? Like,
Don't
that's
ask
a
me.
thing.
My friend,
Yeah.
I haven't put a foot in a gym in a very, very long time.
Like
So I don't know.
that, like, in off season, they're doing slightly different things and you're working different muscles, and it does help come
Yeah.
back to it. So even if you're like, I don't actually care about writing, and it doesn't have to be writing, it could be anything. But I think if you are thinking about music and rhythm, that's probably going to then impact how you photograph. Or if you're thinking about painting, then all of a sudden you might have a different appreciation of how colors and so those of us who writing is the other thing, it might be even more about story, or there's just different ways that those things are going to impact how we build out the art in any other field. And I then, as I said, I started because I wanted pictures to go along with my writing. One thing that I found, especially at the time I had lots of little kids, I had a really hard time writing in the noise at that point in my life. And so photography was something that I could do in the hustle and bustle of my life, where writing felt a little harder in that space. And I was trying to give myself, I don't know, permission to do what feels right in any given season, right? That you're not
Yeah.
holding so tight to the thing you always thought you would do, that when a new thing uncovers itself. But now and so then I leaned pretty hard into photography, and it's been in the last 3 years or so that I've brought back a strong writing practice, and then I like how they sit together. And who knows how that will evolve in the future.
Yeah. Like it. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Amen to whatever creative practice is coming towards you, accepting it and letting go of what's no longer serving you. And I am the same. I feel like as I want to live an artful life, I'm making this decision. And so it's easier for me to pick up different things. Like I have a lot of different outlets and mediums that I like to do. But if you aren't that person, maybe considering trying something outside of your medium, like you said, would be helpful for your medium. And writing and journaling every day, because I don't consider myself a writer. I just don't. It's not where I feel comfortable. Like you are freaking amazing at it. And for me, it's kind of a little more, stop and start. Like I feel like it's learning to drive stick shift. It's like, like back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes I can get bored and sometimes I stop. But just journaling and like practicing, just practice, right? The 1,000-hour principle of you just got to practice until you're great at it. Even though I'm journaling random nonsense that is not for anybody's eyes ever, and I delete it every day even, but to just practice typing it and a thought onto a page, just that alone is immensely helpful.
Because it can be so difficult, especially if you grew up kind of under traditional schooling situations, and you felt like once that it was going to be judged, and it was going to
Oh,
be,
yes.
there was a standard that what your words needed to be. And and so that can be a sort of a triggering experience for some people, and there can be a lot of resistance to the very act, because they're thinking, this has been painful for me in the past. And I can think of all sorts of ways that your words could have been misconstrued in the past or used against you, or there can be this place of difficulty in the practice. But by showing up and doing it through journaling, doing it for your private self, like, and just the repetition of it, you tell yourself, like, oh, I'm safe here. Like, I can show up here. I can do this for myself. This is okay. And I think you can relax into it and see what it reveals.
Yeah. I'm lucky enough to be really old so that stuff I made in
Yeah.
the past wasn't for show. Yes, I did grow up in public school, and yes, I wanted to be a straight A student, and I never have put those like connected the
Yeah.
dots that way, that me writing a paper is going to be graded.
Yeah.
But I feel like in our society today, we create for content's sake, right?
Yeah.
We create to show, and creating to show is super important, but the reason behind it is even more important. And being able to create for no show is also really, really liberating and important for yourself, to just have that freedom of expression for freedom of expression's sake. And if that's journaling, writing, or photography, or dance, or whatever the heck
Yeah.
it is, just doing it for the sake of doing it is so a great first step, especially if you're uncomfortable in that medium.
Yeah. One of the things that it kind of reminded me of too, as you were speaking, something that I think can be an interesting revelation when you are doing that writing just for the sake of yourself, just for your own eyes. But as you see what keeps coming up over and over again, I also think some of your like obsessions can become revealed. And one of the things I like to ask photographers who are engaging in that practice is there an overlap between what you're obsessed with and what you're thinking about all the time and the actual work that you're creating? Because sometimes it's
Ooh.
interesting to me. They aren't. It's like they've just been in their lane of photography and how they're going to depict a thing, and they haven't put those together. And sometimes in writing it, I realize shifts that I should make so that my work is more aligned with my values, or with, what my interests are. But I like it as an indicator for myself.
It's deeply profound, Rachel, and I'm not surprised you had that deeply profound thought, because you're just like that. You're amazing. But it's really true. If you do the artist way, she says in the beginning that you will change. Like, you cannot be the same person if on the other side of this practice. And journaling, and we're talking about writing in
Yeah.
general, like just writing, and
Yeah.
creative writing or whatever, but journaling, yes, the same stuff coming up over and over again. And it's like uncovering things about
Yeah.
yourself and who you really are underneath all of the cultural things that we've taught. Oh my goodness, why am I like fireworking behind me?
Guys, I wish you could have she's saying this
What
like
was
beautiful thing,
that?
and then fireworks exploded behind her screen. It was just her screensaver went nuts. And it was like, it was amazing.
Fireworks screensaver either. Okay, maybe the computer is like, oh, Alison, you're having a wonderful thought. This is so exciting. That was so good. But yeah, like culturally, we've taught to protect ourselves, right? Like, we don't, our true authentic selves, unfortunately, we've had to like learn to keep safe. And when you journal, you're relieving that. You're letting go of these things, peeling things back and finding things about yourself. But connecting it to my work, I haven't thought of that before. Like, the same things that have keep coming up in my journaling, am I showing it in my work? And I'll be honest, no, I'm not. And I wonder if I should.
I mean,
I don't know.
again, you can try to make that work, and you don't have to show that either. But it
Yeah,
could
that's
just
true.
be interesting to see, like, what does this look like in photographic form. What
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be a one-to-one it doesn't always have to be so literal, right? But if you're writing about belonging, seems appropriate given the name of the podcast, but like then if that keeps coming up, some desire for a sense to belong, or what, then what are the different ways that that translates visually, or how do you talk about the absence of it, or do you know what I mean, like that
Yeah.
then becomes an interesting question for consideration. That I just think, I don't know, always asking yourself the questions and seeing what the answers are feels as useful as coming up with the answers. Recently, I felt like in my own journaling practice, I was getting kind of stagnant. And so I've just shifted to, I mean, it feels kind of like a prayerful opening to be like, what shall I know today? Like,
Mm.
what do you got for me, God? And that sort of question, when starting with the pause, has been interesting to see what comes, because otherwise sometimes I would jump right into, this is what I have going on, and this, like, how do I make this happen? But kind of that second of pause has been revelatory. So whenever we
Yeah.
do the pause in our own work, it feels useful.
Definitely. That, like, I was just talking to my son about this last night. That pause between something you react to, right? Like your reaction time, if you can elongate it more, like what are you
Oh,
really actually trying to get across or do? Um, just by expanding that ever so slightly. I was like, even for a millisecond, just expand it just a little more.
yeah,
And I was talking about him, responding to text messages because
yeah,
anyway, I'm a mom of teens. So,
yeah,
but it's true in like having that pause because we're such go, 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 go. Our lives
yeah,
are busy. Everybody's are. And if we can leave space, and I'm going to get a little woo woo here for a second, leaving space for that, like you said, spirituality, like what's God trying to tell me, or what is the creative
yeah,
source wanting to give to you that day? It's like trying to talk
yeah.
to you, but if we're too busy to listen to it, then it's not gonna land. So
No,
having
it
that
felt like I
pause,
was
I
going in
love
with my
it.
text message before they ever
Yeah.
had a response, something, anything to say. And I was like, creative source, here's what I've got going on. And there was never like,
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to create a dialogue there. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's been something kind of 2024, the last few weeks. And I have felt so settled and grounded and
Love it.
like more peaceful than how kind of that tail end of 2023 where you kind of get that uh,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
I'm like,
Very
okay,
much.
what will come to me is going to come to me, and the words. But writing is a practice that I think asks us to slow down, and any creative practice that we're doing I mean, do you knit and crochet?
I knit.
Yeah. I mean, that's a slow ass practice.
It is a slow ass practice. Oh my goodness. People like ask me, why do you do this? First of all, you spend a ton of more money than
Yeah.
buying an actual sweater. First of all, you're going to spend more money, and then you're going to spend who knows how many hours to
Yeah.
actually knit it out. And then if I don't like it, I will rip it out. I will just undo it. It's not about the end result for me.
Yeah.
It's about the practice. It's about
Yeah.
feeling it in my hand, like finding something I want to create, feeling it in my hands, and the rhythm of knitting. Like it's more about the creating than the end result for knitting. That's that like way too reverent for knitting.
No, but I loved it because I was thinking about how different mediums then impact it, and I was thinking about like the
Yeah.
textural and the feeling quality, and that being something that like you love, and I can think about how that also shows up in the images that you make, and like
Oh,
again the interplay between what we love and how they come into different places. Like that makes sense to me, that here's this person who has reverence for texture, and then you're like, oh yeah, duh.
yeah. I haven't thought of that before. That's true, though. That's awesome. Okay, so you offer a writing class. Let's talk about, I've actually taken it, and it was, can I say it this way? It was everything I didn't expect and everything I needed. Like, I went into it for something other than what I got out of it, and what I got out of it was exactly what I needed to get out of it. So let's talk about your class. It was awesome. So let's talk a little bit about it.
So the bone structure of it is that every day for a 4-week period. I mean, I keep saying every day, but it's Monday through Friday. I don't consider the weekends days. I don't know, something in it. You get an emailed prompt. Everybody in the group does. And then twice a week, we meet for live calls that do that we do exercises in class, that there's ideas that I'll share and bring, and then people are sharing their work. Both maybe what they've made outside of the time, and then like sometimes the exercises that we're writing in there. I think I love a prompt, and I love how it can change how we've been thinking about something. And so even if you're a writer, but you feel like me, that you can be writing about the same things over and over again, I don't think that there's anything bad about that. I just had a newsletter on that, and I was writing something else in that same idea. I think we get to write about our obsessions until we're done with them. We'll know we need to stop writing about them because we'll want to. And like, don't suppress that, because if you suppress that, you're going to suppress the whole creative flow. So just like, let it come out and through. But I also think you want to balance that with novelty and new ways of thinking. And probably your obsessions are still going to come through in those places, but maybe now you've changed the lens that you've looked at them, because we're trying to imitate a stream of consciousness style, or we're thinking about how we can use repetitive word phrases. So like, there's some of those craft elements woven in, so that hopefully that you can take some of that to apply to your writing, and feel that like you have more of a toolbox, more skills around it. But primarily, I think it's about the ritual in creating time and space for your writing, for connecting with other creative people who are willing to share their work and to listen to your work. Like, I feel like listening is a huge part of what we're doing in there, and I think that can be a really beautiful thing. So inspiring and connecting and listening feel like really what we're creating the space for together. I mean, I was amazed what some people were sharing in there last year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was mind-blowing, a little daunting, but I think what's so important with your class and what I appreciated so much about it was, number one, it's completely safe. It's a completely safe space. If you're like, I have no creative writing ability whatsoever, you're absolutely welcome and safe in that space. You can choose to share or not share. You can go through the prompts every day in your own way. And when you feel ready to share something, you can. You also do a Facebook group with it. And so people were sharing, they weren't feeling willing to do it in class, but they would do it in the Facebook group, and whoever read it and gave feedback. And honestly, everybody's feedback was incredibly positive. Nobody's going to be mean or pick you apart. That's not the reason for the class whatsoever. It's about, for me, it was about the confidence in my own voice, which I didn't have before I went in. I had no confidence in my voice whatsoever, and that my voice didn't matter. And after I came out of the class, I felt like, yes, this is my voice. And it freaking matters. And I'm going to share it. And if I felt confident enough that if I got negative feedback, or if people are like, what you're saying is absolutely not true or ridiculous or wrong, I could be like, well, that's how I feel, and you can take it or leave it. And it was so liberating to take your class for me in that sense.
That makes me so like happy. That brings me a lot of joy. Because like I like hearing your voice. I like
Thank
the
you.
things that you have to say. I like how you say them in your podcast. I like how you say them in your newsletter. I like how you say them on your Instagram. And I do think it is a nice place to be able to practice sharing that work, like, and having kind of a baby step maybe before
Mm-hmm.
you are trying to share it more publicly, because it's a more limited group. And also, I don't know if you ever find this, sometimes I'm more worried about sharing things to people I know than people I don't know. Like, it's a lot easier to
Yeah.
show it to strangers, where it can feel a lot weirder when you're like at the grocery store and that lady that lives across the street
Mm-hmm.
read your do you know what I mean? That
Yeah,
feels a
no, I
little
do.
more
I
like,
absolutely do.
ah!
Yeah.
And, but so you are practicing it, that kind of sharing in a group that is smaller and is maybe separate from the rest of your life, and it might make you feel a little more liberated to try out what it feels like to speak certain truths. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you are feeling like you need to incorporate, like you need to be writing more for whatever reason, your business, your personal self, your creative practice, whatever, your class is definitely the place to start. It is a really great springboard for whatever needs to come next.
I had this thought as you were talking too about like how it can be intimidating if you don't feel like a writer. And there were people in that class who were very well, and also like
Yeah,
people who were
me.
very confident writers and like this was really something that they had done. But I want to give you a little more of my background. So I have this homeschooling background, but I was also a public school English teacher for 8 years. So I'm like used to reading and responding to people's writing. But one of the things I love about a homeschooling model is that um, when, and I think like this is kind of the Montessori model sometimes, but the idea that like everybody's not on the same level all the time. I don't love like age segregation when kids are little, and I also don't love like skill segregation always, because I think that there's also so much learning that gets to happen when you have people like in various abilities coming together. And it doesn't just mean that the people who are the most skilled and confident at something are just like carrying the weight. I also think of like people who maybe don't know how to do it. I think that they're also learning from them. You become more aware of your own writing and your own process and your own decisions and why you're doing things. Sometimes also when you're seeing people who aren't doing those things and you're thinking about them, that it can be like, by reading that, you notice like, oh, I think they could have kind of tweaked their parallel structure. And am I doing that? Do you know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
there's this interplay that happens. And I think that that is a beautiful way to learn and to come together. And I felt like
Yeah.
it was one of the things I loved about the class last year. And I'm
I did.
looking forward to it
So
again.
my perspective is a newbie, and that's
Yeah.
why I keep talking about it. But there were people in there who obviously were very well read
Yeah.
and write
Yeah.
often. And it was just so interesting to interact with them. Yeah. And if you, it, I just have my perspective, but yeah,
Yeah.
I would assume that if you've been doing it, having just gaining a different point of view with your work, no matter where you are in your journey of writing, is helpful.
Which, I like bringing not completely homogenous groups together in an ideal world. So I like it
Mm-hmm.
when that that happens, and then the different things that you bring to it. Also, I think sometimes, it's that beginner's mindset can also be revelatory. I mean, how many people do you know that, to bring it back to photography, you like learn how to take kind of perfect pictures, and then you want to go back to like using disposable film cameras so that it's messy and has that wild raw quality. And sometimes as you're reading people's work who they haven't polished it so much, it reminds you of that that energy and that zest that can come for writing that you're like, oh man, I've been editing that out of my work. Like, how do I reconnect to that piece of it?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so
Oh,
when does your next run of the workshop go?
oh, you've got me so excited thinking about it, Allison,
Yeah,
because it's
sure.
not for a little bit. The class doesn't start until March 4th, I believe is the first Monday in March, and then it runs for 4 weeks. The live portion of the class is on Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon Eastern, and those are all recorded.
Yeah.
And based on feedback that somebody named Alison Hatch, I'm going to change how you get the recordings, because you had said that it was like,
sorry,
no,
it was
I love that. I was
challenging.
like, oh, at the end of every email, I'm just going to keep, they can all be there, the links in every single email, so that like when I'm sending, anyhow, that's a boring technical piece, but I was like, Allison, thanks for that. That was a good, I can fix that.
Yes. Technology challenged me. It was like, where are the recordings again?
Yeah.
But I love that you're doing it in March. I feel like spring is, such a great time to work on ourselves, expand ourselves and grow. Whatever little seed of that creative source was within you is ready to expand. Like March is such a great time to do it. I love you're doing it in March.
No, it feels really right to me, because I think lots of us were
Yeah.
kind of getting out of our slumber. And I think even as people are signing up for it now, it feels that like I'm ready to have something to be excited about and to look forward to. And that often,
Yeah.
also depending on like what region you are in photograph, I start to feel that photograph, like that desire to create. But sometimes in March, the light still isn't great. It's not that, like, it's still not that easy, the circumstances, but then getting to have something to start scratching that creative itch as you feel yourself kind of working out of the dirt, trying to
Yeah,
bloom.
definitely. Definitely. Okay, so you can sign up for the class now.
Yep, you can sign up for the class now. I think based on when Allison said this is coming out, the early bird price, which saves $100, applies until January 29th. So
Oh,
if you're
yes, you'll
listening
have a
to
week.
this,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so if you're listening to this quickly, or like when it comes out, you still have time
A
for the
couple
early
days,
bird
actually.
price.
Yeah, a couple
Yeah.
days because it's going to come out. What's the date today? Anyway, it's coming out soon.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then what else can people, if they don't want to work with you with writing, well, how else can they work with you? You have so many different offers. Let's hear them real quick.
If you are a photographer and you want to work in kind of a longer format through mentorship, I offer an intimate mentorship experience where it's like 4 people and for 4 months, and there's a in-person workshop in my hometown. So people are signing up for that summer round right now. And I also travel the US making pictures. And so if you are interested in working together, all of that's at rachellarsenweaver.com or rachel.larsen.weaver on Instagram. And then
Perfect.
you can sign up for my weekly newsletter if you're so inclined.
I
And
love your
one of the things
newsletter.
I like about newsletters too, it also kind of, I don't, it gives you a place. Do you ever find this, that you'll read somebody's newsletter and then you kind of want to respond to it, and that gives
Yes.
you your idea for your newsletter? That like
Yeah.
you just like let it kind of be a conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
I think
It's
if you're
interesting to see who responds and who doesn't respond to my newsletter. Yeah,
yeah,
it is. And
but
those people usually have their own newsletter who are responding. Yeah.
but I also think sometimes the response can be like, sometimes you might have said something and I might not respond directly almost, but then the idea is percolating, and then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oops, 3 weeks later, I didn't even realize, like, I wrote my own newsletter in response to it, because like that's how
No,
ideas work with
seriously.
us, right?
Like what comes to mind is that so Rachel did a long form session with me and my boys here in New Mexico, which was amazing. And we talked about relationships. So I've been married for, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, 24 years, a long time.
Yeah.
So, and that like, we
Yeah.
celebrate newness, marriage, and the beginnings
Yeah.
of things instead of the relationships and it's involved, like how it evolves and grows and changes and morphs. And you did a newsletter on it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you, like it just,
No,
that
I mean,
conversation just kept going. It was so awesome.
No, because like also because Allison and her partner are like such best friends, and
We
like
are.
they're
It's
so
ridiculous.
like,
We're
no,
disgusting.
but it's inspiring, and it's and you're like, what how do we get more places for celebrating that? So yeah, and then you get to
Yeah.
write about it and think about it later. And I feel like that's what I love about writing. It gives me this place to keep, I don't know, make tangible all of these swirling thoughts and observations and things you want to celebrate and
Mm.
things you want to, and you're like, oh, I've got a container for that.
Yeah, exactly. Container like photography is like a piece we get to hold on to a little longer. And writing is holding
Yeah.
on to it and just savoring it and letting it, sit just a little bit
Yeah.
longer on your palate. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
it. Well, thank you, Rachel, so much for being
Thank
on.
you.
I love talking to you. I
I do
wish you were
too.
closer so we could
I,
hang out more. Why do
I
you have
know.
to
Well,
live
I
so
want to be
freaking far
closer because I want
away?
to be in New Mexico more.
Yeah. I
I
know
might
you
like
did
New
like
Mexico
it.
more than you do.
You did. It's okay. I'm trying to love it. I am. I really am. But you did. You really liked it. So thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. If you guys are listening to this, all the links will be in the show notes to Rachel's website and the words workshop and all the other fun things that you can work with Rachel in. And thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Talking to Rachel is always such a fun time. And I am so glad that she was on. She is an amazing person. And our conversation was awesome. I just wanted to quickly say if you like the You Belong podcast, I would so appreciate it if you would share it or leave a review wherever you listen to it. And I wanted to also say thank you so much for listening and thank you for being you.